Benicio del Toro, when he transforms into the Wolfman, we do see him engaging in some carnivorous action. He specifically requested that the props be edible for the human pieces he was eating so that he could really get in there. So bone was constructed. I believe they used honeycomb to be some of the blood. They used different jellies. They used some licorice type stuff.
So they didn't use real human flesh is what you're getting at.
No. They did not use real human flesh. But he really did want to have that 3,
2, 1, punch it.
Could you jump to light speed in that tin can? Go back in time in the DeLorean. Will it crash or take to the sky? Tell me, smart guy, does it fly?
Welcome to Does It Fly, the podcast that puts your favorite sci-fi properties, inventions, and conceits to the test. I'm your mad scientist, Hakeem Oluseyi.
And I'm your pop culture expert, Tamara Krinsky. Time to dive into today's topic and see, does it fly? Oh, hi, Hakeem.
That is music to my ears. Are you back?
I'm just Tamara, transforming right before your eyes.
Right before your eyes. So, the moon has been beautiful. And I saw this. It wasn't a fox, but it was red. And it had these canines. And I tell you, it reminded me of you.
That is just my love language. Thank you so much.
That was your love language. Words of transformation.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Does It Fly? I'm Tamara Krinsky. I am here with Dr. O, Hakeem Oluseyi. Hakeem, what are we talking about today?
Today, we are talking about the Wolfman, not Jack, the one who will eat you.
And we are specifically looking at the Wolfman from 2010, but we'll also talk a little bit about the original from 1941. This was part of...
Wow.
Yeah, the Universal Studios group of monster movies set a template, and we're going to dive into what it means to transform into a wolf, both the science and the story.
Yeah, and who doesn't want to transform? I mean, life is a story of transformation for many of us. And, whether it's, we become better, we evolve as human beings, not transform into a completely different entity. But, we're born idiots. We reach puberty, become even more idiotic, right? And then we got to repair ourselves from whatever happened during childhood. So, there's often a need to transform. Now, those are positive transformations. I'm not sure the Wolfman is looked at as a positive transformation.
No, not so much. Not so much. I mean, this movie, and we'll get into the specifics of the movie in a little bit, but just to give you a little bit of background for those who may not be as familiar with it, the 1941 original starred Lon Chaney as the Wolfman. And then in 2010, we had a remake directed by Joe Johnston, and Benicio del Toro stars as the proverbial Wolfman. Also, you have some amazing actors like Anthony Hopkins who were in it. And of course, these movies came out a little while ago, but they may be new to you. So spoiler alert, if you do not want us to spoil anything, now would be the time to press pause, go watch, come back, and you can listen to Hakeem and I talk a little bit more.
I mean, how much variation can you have on the theme of transforming into a wolf anyway, right? I mean, if you know one wolf transformation story, it's a matter of motivation, effects, and twists aside from the transformation, right?
Well, actually, I will get into that a little bit more when we talk about story, but I actually think there are subtleties and changes in how you tell that story and how that transformation is portrayed. And that's both because of a vision of a director or a writer, or because of the technology that's available in filmmaking that allows transformation to be portrayed differently on screen. So there are things that can change.
That's
but
right.
How much is the question? That's
not just the question. Yeah. So here is how I'm looking at this. So what I described from the opening is the human universal experience of self-transformation, which is an internal thing. This transformation is an external transformation, right? It's a metamorphosis, which is something that happens within the natural world. So for those of you who may be new listening to this for the first time, I have begun the science section. So as your resident scientist, I discuss the science of whatever the conceit is within the enterprise. In this case, this particular 2010 movie. And I tell you, I hear 2010 and I think now, but I also think ancient past, which is, for those of you who may be in your 20s, you're going to get to this point in life. Where it's like, you're also, how old am I?
You're also a physicist, so I know for you time has different meaning anyway than most of us mere mortals.
Oh, does it ever? And I've been studying time a lot lately, so I don't even get me started. So anyway, back to this Wolfman transformation. So here's what we have. And here's what's problematic. We have a human in human form who, in a matter of seconds, maybe up to a minute or so, changes their shape physically, right? They metamorphosize into a new, not human phenotype, but actually species transitioning. It's still a male. I mean, it's still a mammal, but it's a canine instead of a of the Homo primate group, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, where did we get started with this? Scientifically, let's just start from the very beginning. Ain't happening. That ain't happening. But the whole idea of it is really pretty cool, because I think that, the way life works on Earth, the stuff we just take for granted, I feel like, man, maybe we need to slow down and take another look at this, because the actual metamorphoses that occur in the real world, right? Egg, larva, pupa, adult for a lot of species. Then there's the ones that have a nymph phase and then they grow up to be an adult that looks very similar. These things are real. And the idea, even fish, right? The fish that's born look like a normal fish, then it becomes a flat fish and the eye migrates to the other side of the head. Imagine if we humans did that. I mean, our transformation is, if you take two children, male and female, they look identical, right? They look identical. Post-puberty, we have transformed, right? Our bodies change through sexual maturation, which, it's a very different person now, right? Not to mention, as a dude, I'm steadily transforming, because the main transition is body hair and muscles, right? Body hair and muscles, and so you go from being a sweet little guy to a beast, essentially, right? Which is essentially the werewolf transformation.
Well, I was going to say, like, body hair and muscles seem to be a key transformation of the Wolfman.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. It's almost like you become that. But the difference is the species change element. But, I think that also when you look at more metamorphoses that happen instantly in nature, it's not that they're changing, is that they are reconfiguring themselves. Mm-hmm. So, for example, I'm a lizard. I have these predators that come at me. So what am I going to do? I'm going to stand on my hind feet and open my gills. So now I look bigger and scarier, even though it was there all along, right? And then there's like some sort of a squid or octopus that spreads out like a blanket to look bigger, right?
I don't know if you've seen. Yeah. I mean, I know there's the red panda, which does, the same thing. It like stands and goes, ah!
I didn't know that. The red panda tries to scare you?
It's entirely possible. I may have gone down a YouTube rabbit hole watching red panda videos. Look them up. You will laugh. If you ever just need a giggle, look up red panda videos of them going,
I got to go look at some red panda videos. Yeah. So this idea of metamorphosizing in order to defend oneself, right, or appear scarier, that's a real thing. Then there is, what the cephalopods do. We always got to come back to the planet of the cephalopods, right? They can really change their skin texture, their color, and look like a different life form. So what am I getting at here? Metamorphosis is an actual scientific strategy in life. It usually does not involve a curse, as far as we know, right? Unless we're talking about locusts, right? The grasshoppers will transform into locusts under certain conditions. And you know what? We have this other kind of transformation. It's called groupthink, right? You get a bunch of humans together and it's like, hey, Johnny is a witch. Let's burn him at the stake, right? And then you get this craziness. But as far as just completely reconfiguring your bones, your jaw, your skull structure, and not to mention brain structure, because our brains are wired to investigate the world through our eyes. The canine brain is wired more strongly for an olfactory response, right? It smells. They smell their way through the world. They see a different world than the world that we see because they're seeing it with their noses. Okay, so the werewolf. There is the werewolf that the person who is the werewolf experiences, and there is the werewolf whom external people experience. Okay, so there are mental things that can happen to you where you actually do think of yourself as a wolf. Right? That could actually happen. And you can go and behave as a wolf. So if you go to these stories, right, the first story known to history of someone being, transformed into a wolf happens in Gilgamesh. Right? That goes way back. So I'm imagining back in the day, if a person starts behaving wolf-like, which is something that happens, and, the wolf was a bigger part of the lore back then. So if someone is like, oh, I'm going to transform into a monster, they may very well choose subconsciously to become a wolf. And so the people around them seeing this behavior, especially at night, right? They would say, Johnny transformed into a wolf, right? And Johnny may really think that he transformed into a wolf, right?
Well, and going back to what you were talking about before with groupthink, once you sort of throw the church in there, which in Europe, dominated so much of what was happening from like the 13th century to, let's say, like 16th, 17th century, as farming changed, as agriculture changed, and suddenly like sheep became such a big part of the economy. Well, wolves attack sheep, and sheep had this whole metaphor, as God's flock. So suddenly if a wolf attacks, you're seen as evil. So there's
you just come up with that? Or that popped in your head earlier? That's pretty good.
No. I did not come up with that. I just once we started looking at this film, I did a bit of a deep dive into the history of wolf lore. And I won't go into full wolf history because that would be an entirely different episode, but I have to give credit to there's a video podcast called Monstrum, which has some, if you want like a deep dive into the history of like werewolf stories and werewolf lore, I highly recommend it. It was really helpful for this episode. So that's where some of that information came from.
Right. Yeah. So here is the thing so when I tie all this together, right, you can have a person really believe that they transformed into a wolf. In earlier times, you can have people who really think that person transformed into a wolf. Then you could actually have people who could play with your minds. Like, it wasn't unusual when I started looking at the history of war earlier this year in Europe and saw how, there was the spread of humans across the continent. And then those who were in the north was like, it's cold. Let's go take some of them southern lands, right? When the Germanic tribe started, fighting against the Romans and taking Gaul and such, a regular thing they would do is wrap themselves in wolf skins, right? To scare the enemy. So what you have is, you have, number one, a nature, and I mean nature itself, that provides many means of metamorphosis, right? You have humans who, as an individual, can think, I really transformed into a wolf. And you can have others that are like, oh, I saw a wolf man last night. I saw a pack of them, right? And especially if they mean ill will, and they're sneaking into your village, snatching you up out of there, so on the one hand, no, you're not going to actually, transform into a wolf. Right?
Can I see you do that again, please? What'd you
Wait a minute, that was a rooster. Yeah.
As opposed to, I think it's like the long woo versus like the
I don't know where I was, somewhere in the middle of somewhere, because of some sciencey reason. And there were coyotes. It might have been white sands, but you could literally go out there and go, I was about to rooster again. See, now I sound like ludicrous.
Now you need like one long sustained. Ready? We'll do it together. One, right. 2, 3. You got it.
Oh, wait a minute. I turned into Miguel Gorilla. All right. But the point is, the thing that's tough is that you're not going to actually get the transformation as revealed like the movie. But what it's based on, the ideas that it's based on are really, truly grounded, right? They really go back to literature, which I'm sure you're going to talk about throughout, this European history. We know these animal transformations probably, I always hate to say it didn't happen. It can't happen because I'm like, there could be that one possibility. I don't know. But, okay, it didn't happen. Nobody's transformed into a wolf, but people can be convinced that they did, and people can be convinced that others did. So, yeah, I'm going to say the transformation of a human into a wolf or any other non-human animal does not fly, even though it's cool.
Well, and that's a great place to pick up story, right? Because one of the great things about stories, about film, about TV, is that it can take an idea that doesn't necessarily have scientific basis in real life and put it on screen and have it be cool. And when it comes to monster movies, when it comes to creatures like the Wolfman, I would argue that that is precisely what they've done. They've taken these stories that, as you were saying, go back in time. I mean, you go back to ancient Greece and ancient Rome, and there are stories about men transforming into wolves and women transforming into wolves. You've got wolf lore that goes back. And then, of course, as we were saying, you go through Europe, you bring in some of the church stuff, you go to, stories of then at a certain point, like witches and werewolves got sort of mixed up, and they had They had witch trials. They had the witch trials. Say that slowly. Witch trials and werewolf trials. So these stories have been going on and on and on. Now,
you just inspired a series for me there, Tamara, where you're playing the role of some young kid, female who takes other kids on these trips through history.
Ooh,
and with that voice, they had witch trials, and then in Salem, Massachusetts, they had taxes. Anyway, so
instead of drunk history, we can have toddler history.
Toddler history, there you go.
Toddler history. But the first appearance of werewolves, at least that we know about, the first appearance of werewolves and wolfmen in cinema was in the short film The Werewolf, which was in 1913. It was a silent film, and unfortunately, all prints were destroyed in a fire in 1924. But it was about 18 minutes. That was the first appearance. And then, as the filmmaking industry grew, you had more appearances. As they looked for places to pull story from. So you had The Werewolf of London in 1935, and that was really the first one to feature sort of a man type, human type werewolf.
What was the previous one? It was just a wolf monster type werewolf?
Yeah. Sort of more of a monster. And again, because it's a silent film, and again, because there's no more copies of it, we can read about it,
right?
But we don't really know. And then you get to 1941, which is when the original The Wolfman was released by Universal. And this was a part of Universal's Monsters series. So they released Frankenstein and Dracula in 1931. And, they were pulling, in this case, from previously, today we would call it IP, but from previously existing stories. So
here's the question. Did these things show up on stage? So I'm guessing, so film preceded television, right? I don't know. I'm guessing. Okay. And so before that, everything is live. You only have on stage. So...
Well, you also had radio. You had radio.
Oh, radio. Yeah. So were there, before video, film or television?
Screened entertainment.
Screened entertainment, right? Was there a radio or a stage werewolf that you're aware of?
That is a fabulous question that I do not know the answer to and would love to know the answer to. So if anyone watching or listening does know, please put it in the comments, because I am now very curious. I mean, what I can say is that my theatrical brain goes to the difficulties with portraying a werewolf on stage, only because if you're going to see the transformation, how do you do that live? How do you do that in a way that is realistic on stage and doesn't
silhouette.
look
You
ridiculous?
do it in silhouette.
Yeah.
You put a screen.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a possibility.
Yeah.
And
you
they
shine a light, and you see the person going, all right. And someone slips a hat on them, they're like, and they get a glove, and then they come out in their wolf costume.
I think you've got a whole second career in vaudeville, so you're ready to go.
I want to see that limelight. I want to be bathed in it. Yeah.
But what I think is so interesting about the 1941 film is that if you look in literature, there were a lot of different ways you could transform into a werewolf. Sometimes it was something that you ate. Sometimes it was, there's one thing I read where like you step in the, or you drink from the water of a foot.
That's right.
A footprint.
The paw print. Yeah.
Yeah. So like there's many, many ways. But what the 1941 film did, which was, and I hope I say his name correctly and pay him proper homage, Kurt Siodmak. And again, I apologize. Kurt Siodmak, who was the writer of the 1941 Wolfman, he really put forth in cinema two important traditions. One was the bite, and the other one was turning into a wolf by the light of the full moon. So, you know, you sort of had this phrase, when the wolfbane blooms and the autumn moon is bright, and that's repeated several times. And that actually set the template for much of what has come after in film for this whole mythology of what is a werewolf, how do we picture them, and all of that. Oh, and then the other thing was, that a werewolf was susceptible to silver. So
I was just getting there.
Silver cane. So that, again, that was something that his writer brain invented.
Right. So tell me, is that the only way you kill a werewolf? Is the silver bullet? Or
I don't think it's the only way, but you know, in the same way that like you know, a vampire, it's the stake through the heart.
Right.
It's certainly one of the more well-known ways. And rumor has it, I don't know if this is factually true, but I'll put it out there. Rumor has it is that Kurt was watching a lot of Lone Ranger at the time that he wrote this. And so that's where he sort of got the idea for the silver bullet, things like that. Also, then when you also pull from the idea that the church, silver was valued there and they had a lot of uses for it and it had meaning there. So things like that. Then taking you on like a really quick ride through film history, you have a bunch of this whole monster universe is very popular in the decade or so that follows. Universal does a ton of different monster movies. They actually start like the first crossover universe essentially I think it was Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, which was 1943. Yeah. So, you know, these tied universes actually go back a long way. But it does change over time. Like the way that werewolves have been portrayed and the kinds of movies made about them do change over time. So like, for example, in the 1950s, we're post-World War II, we're post-atomic bomb. You know, we've got all sorts of Cold War stuff happening. So suddenly the real world is very scary. So on screen, werewolf stories tended to shift into B movies. So different kind of portrayal, kind of comedic, kind of campy. Then audiences mature a little bit more. The teenage audiences that were the fans of those movies in the 50s suddenly are older. They're having families. So you've either got sort of more sophisticated portrayals, or you've got family-friendly wolf comedies like the Munsters.
Right.
So
yes,
you had
Munsters. Love the Munsters. Yeah.
So you had like Eddie Munster, who, you know, was part werewolf and I think part vampire.
Right.
And then, you know,
I could see him when you said that, and it was hilarious.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, you know, you kind of like don't have a ton of like werewolf movies at the forefront in the 70s, but then flash forward to the 80s, suddenly technology, this is what I was talking about before, technology allows for a different kind of portrayal on screen.
Teen Wolf? Are we getting a Teen Wolf?
Oh, we are so getting a Teen Wolf.
Yes.
Yeah. So you've got Teen Wolf, which is a comedy. You've also got a classic of the genre, which is An American Werewolf in London. And that's, you know, your scary werewolf movie. It gives it a modern sensibility. And Rick Baker was responsible for doing the transformation makeup in there. He won an Oscar for it.
Oh,
and
nice.
Yeah, and it's the very first year that they actually gave out an Oscar for best makeup.
Wow.
But then I think something else that's interesting too is when you were saying before, transformation is transformation, werewolf is werewolf, and we talk about the different forms. So those are a couple of examples of different ways of telling stories, but also you have the sort of environment, this is where we get into theme a little bit more, around how a werewolf movie story is told and framed. So like, for example, there's a movie called Ginger Snaps, which was released in the early 2000s, I think. And it's basically a metaphor. It's like a puberty metaphor.
Everyone's favorite time of life.
Yeah. And then you get into things like Twilight, which have werewolves and all of that. So,
yeah. I kind of, I heard the top Twilight craze, and I sat down to watch Twilight at a certain point late. And the second that dude starts sparkling, I turned it off. I don't want my monster sparkling.
Robert Pattinson is very sparkly.
I'm like, what? Come on, man. Sparkling. All right. So
then we get
we go.
2010.
This werewolf stands in a ecosystem of werewolves. How could there even be consistency? I mean, it seems like the only things, like you said, you established a template in 1941.
Right.
But new entertainment is around, surprise me, give me something new, right?
Well, I think two things. So I think what's interesting about the 2010 movie, which is directed by Joe Johnston, who, has directed movie like Captain America, The First Avenger. He actually started as a concept artist. He worked on Star Wars. He was involved in the design for Boba Fett. So you have someone who understands creating character on screen through visual means. And by the time you get to 2010, you've got CGI, which can be used in a variety of ways to show transformation differently. And in the 2010 The Wolfman, you have a combination of practical, because you, again, come back with Rick Baker, who also won an Oscar for Best Makeup. And he's doing practical effects. I mean, there was like yak hair sewn into these masks. I mean, it's incredible the work that he did. In fact, Anthony Hopkins, who plays Sir John, who plays Benicio del Toro's father, he originally was like not as available and actually had not yet even signed his contract for the film. And when he was first sent like the concept pieces by Rick Baker for this, he got really excited. And he was like, oh my God, anything I can do to support this. And he was like, well, can you actually come down here so we could do a full body cast of you? And that will help us get started on this. And even though he hadn't signed his contract yet, he was like, yeah, I'm coming. Let's do this.
Wow.
So you meld that with CGI, which suddenly allowed you to see things close up, like we were talking about, from the science perspective.
Right.
The quick transformation of bones and things like that wouldn't happen in real life, but you couldn't do it on screen either. But now with CGI, you could actually see the growth of the hair. You could see the snouting. You could see the limbs transforming. And they actually had leg extensions that they put on the actors. So it was a combination of a practical effect and a CGI effect. And that's part of the reason I think this transformation works in an update, because we get to see this physical transformation happen in a new way. And then you surround it by this very gothic, moody feel, this moody setting. And then thematically, you have a werewolf story that is also very much the story of a father and son that explores this idea of, and I believe it was Joe Johnston who said this, I'm paraphrasing, but does the bite allow the inner beast that already existed to come out? Or does the bite create the beast within? And what is human nature? What are our animal instincts? You've got a big difference in father and son and the way that they approach it. The son, played by Benicio del Toro, Lawrence, is very much the reluctant werewolf, whereas you eventually find out the father is one who for a long time has been muzzling his instincts and has his manservant lock him up. Every time there's a full moon, he finally gives in to this freedom that he feels when he releases his animal instinct, and he wants his son to feel that, and he encourages him no matter what kind of havoc it wreaks.
Doesn't sound like a good idea.
Not so much. Not so much.
Not sound like it. I'm curious. If you weigh the human and weigh the wolf, do they weigh the same thing? Is there some sort of violation of conservation of mass and energy there?
That's a good question. I do think, I don't know, the werewolves have a lot more hair. I don't know how much body mass hair adds, but there's definitely a lot more happening there. So
it is. And, if you ever wash your doggy, you know what they look like when they get all wet. They go from this big fluffy thing to this little skinny mammal. All right. So you have not had a single criticism of this thing here, which is, that's saying a lot.
Well, let me say this. I get bumped in a couple of places. I will say one of the big bumps is the fact that Emily Blunt is severely underutilized in this movie. She plays the former fiance of Lawrence's brother, who Lawrence then eventually falls in love with. She's actually the one responsible for calling Lawrence to come back to the English estate to find out what happened to her fiance, who is, disappeared, and then who they eventually find mauled, and it turns out to be a werewolf, and it goes from there. But she basically gets stuck in the girlfriend role, which is a crime, especially because we've seen her in movies like A Quiet Place, where she's amazing at action, and she has fought beasts before. Right. That bumped me. I mean, there's things like the last scene where suddenly you have the two, you have Anthony Hopkins and Benicio del Toro's characters in full werewolf form fighting each other. There's a couple of moments in there where I'm like, there's some stuff happening here that maybe isn't quite as believable on screen as one might want. Their creatures need a little bit more weight. They toss each other across the room a little bit too easily.
Right. That's an interesting thing you bring up, because that is something that you would imagine should be easy. If I miniaturize this thing, it should just be the big thing smaller. But no, it's not. The weight really impacts how things look on the screen.
And you see that. I mean, it was interesting because when I was watching it, in some ways it reminded me of some of the things like, for the Hulk Thor fight that you see in, so there's some interesting stuff there that I got bumped by a little bit. But what I would say overall, does the werewolf transformation fly in the 2010 The Wolfman is, I think it does, because I think they ground us in a psychological transformation, which, as you were talking about scientifically, is just as key a question in this idea of can you transform? But I also think that even though, now looking back at it 15 years or so, we have different effects that are available to us. I think at the time, they tried to do some interesting things and show you that transformation in different ways through the combination of newly available CGI effects and practical effects. And I, as a craftsperson, respect that. I respect what they were trying to do. Like, not every single moment of it works, but overall, the transformation they show you on screen is grounded enough in psychology, grounded in this Gothic Victorian moody universe that they create, and grounded, honestly, in these great, really fun, interesting performances from Benicio del Toro and Anthony Hopkins, supported by the effects, that I think the transformation flies. I want to go on the what if journey they give me.
So what you're saying is,
yes.
That's it. It flies.
It flies.
Now, I so feel you on that. I think of it, for me, the example of that is Prince, the musician. I'm like, if you're alive today, if you're coming into your teens, you're checking out music, you cannot have an appreciation for Prince. It's hard because you don't get the revolutionary aspect of it. You don't get how it changes everything. You only, what he did is commonplace now, right? The songs that were ultra racy and risque are now run of the mill. They're even, on the opposite end of the spectrum, you might say, in comparison to how extreme things have gone. So it's the same way with CGI. It gets better and better and better with time. And so if you look at something that was cutting edge in 2010 and you're evaluating it from a 2025 perspective, it's if you weren't there to see how transformative it was because we had seen transformations before.
Right. So
and that was the best at the time. Yeah.
So that actually is like a good jumping off point for what I'll say our third part. Does it fly for the vibe? So my question to you is, in the context of the here and now, where we are, and in modernity, this idea of would it be interesting / useful in the modern day to be able to transform into another creature? And, I sort of asked that like as a jumping off point. Our planet clearly is in trouble right now. And, there's we talk about like living in the Anthropocene where humans have dominated our planet and changed it. And that's problematic in so many ways. Would it be useful to be able to live a day in the life of some of the other creatures on this planet?
Oh, so those are different perspectives. I think about things when you first started bringing it up, I was thinking in terms of utility, practicality. I'm like, okay, so I'm running for the police. Would it be good to transform into a racehorse? Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
That's a joke, y'all. I ain't running from the police, okay? No. So this ain't a rap video from the 80s or the 90s. So, it depends because especially when it comes to sensory things, like that whole idea of the dog, the canine, seeing the world through the sense of smell, the idea of being able to echolocate, the idea of being able to see in the infrared, like pit vipers, and ultraviolet, like some insects. I would love to have these I would love to be able to see the world the way other species see the world. Because I am convinced, even though I'm not convinced, but I suspect that animals are way more conscious and intelligent than we give them credit for. I've been looking at a lot of the research on animal intelligence, and every time they're able to imagine a new experiment, because it's really a failure of the experimenters. The whole idea of if you measure a shark's, intelligence on their ability to climb a tree, they're going to fail every time, right? So they're finding these different ways to experiment to understand the individuality. Do they have individual personalities? And they find almost invariably, yes, they have these abilities that we did not anticipate. And so if I could have the experience of a beetle, because think about it this way, all life does stem back to Luca, the last universal common ancestor. But we are all different. Where was I going with that? I completely forgot.
No, wait, I'm going to ask you a question. Tell me more about Luca. That's not a term I'm familiar with.
Oh, yeah.
I'm guessing other people aren't either.
Yeah. Oh, right. That's where I was getting at. So Luca is the last universal common ancestor. So there was recently a study that came out that looked at like 700 in 2024, that looked at 700 to 800, I think, different species of microscopic life forms. And they wanted to understand what genes are common across all of them. And so those would have been inherited from that last common universal ancestor. And what they found was that particular entity went back to 4.2 billion years ago. And because of the metabolic pathways that are evident in its genetics, it was evolved. So it is not thought to be the actual first life form. It's thought to be the one life form that did not go extinct from a whole ecosystem of life forms that evolved. So all of the living things that we can trace back to Luca is not the beginning of everything. It's the one that led to everything that exists now, but it was a part of a more broad, larger genetic grouping, right?
So you're saying that like whether we're talking about meat or whether we're talking about your pet dog or whether we're talking about a donkey or a butterfly, we all go back to Luca.
We all go back to Luca.
But Luca isn't the only thing that was around. Luca was part of a larger ecosystem. Luca's the one that survived. And
that's right. Luca's progeny survived to become the rest of us. So I don't know how we got on that path, but I would like to have the sensory abilities that are broadly spread across life in other animals.
What would be, all right, so fun question to kind of like wrap up the vibes. What would be the top 3 animals you'd want to be able to transform into to be able to kind of experience life? We can go back and forth. You do one, then I'll do one. And
Okay, so I would love to explore the ocean. So I'm going to go with an orca. All right. So nothing messes with me.
Okay.
I would love to explore the skies.
Mm-hmm.
So I would be that eagle-eyed eagle, flying through the skies and exploring the world that way. So I've taken care of the liquids so what would I want to be on Earth? You know what? I would want to go into the brain of something that is super long-lived, like a scorpion, a species that goes back hundreds of millions of years, right?
Yeah.
I would want to jump into their mind and see what it's like to be them. Or even a subterranean species. What is it like to live in the darkness of undergroundness and explore your world that way?
So that's what I think about when I think about the ocean.
Yeah.
And living in the ocean. Like, I think I might want to be one of those creatures that lives really, really, really far down. And so light and vision isn't your primary sensorial mechanism. And so what is it like to live in that kind of world? We've talked before about alien life and different aliens that we see, in different TV and film things. We talk about, one of the ideas that I always love that you bring to the conversation is, well, what kind of world would have spawned this? So I feel like that might be as close as I could get on Earth to being in a completely different environment that would spawn a different kind of life. So I'd love that. Yeah. I'm with you on the flying. I definitely want to learn to fly. I don't know. I feel like flight-wise, maybe, I'm not sure which bird, but I do like that. Maybe a hummingbird, because they're so like light and quick and they live in gardens, but also like the way that they sense things and make, they have the tongues and everything. So
I wonder what their perception of time is like. Imagine if you're beating your wings at like certain, that fast.
To be able to move that fast. Yeah. I feel like if I had hummingbird qualities, I would have been a much better sports player. Anyway, so hummingbird.
You're in the wrong sport. You could be a WNBA star tomorrow.
Dude, I am 4'11".
That's why. You ever at Muggsy Bogues?
Well, maybe. All right. So maybe if I had like, I don't know I'm trying to, I'm allergic to cats, but I love them. And I sort of love the idea of what would it be like to have a jungle life? So I don't know, a panther, a jaguar, a tiger, they're able to leap, right? So that would help.
But what about how they eat? Would you, what is it like to, latch on to the neck of a gazelle and, feel good about it?
I don't know, but it does, like, kind of going back to this planetary ecosystem and sort of a more like philosophical climate-based point of view about transformation and living life as a different type of animal, not the human animals we are. I mean, we're so far removed from, we are often, not everybody, many of us are so far removed from the origin of our food.
Oh, yeah.
So the idea of going back and having that primal experience, something to really ground you in how do you live on this planet? And also, I'll end with this fun fact from the film to bring it back around to the film. So, random piece of trivia. Apparently, Benicio del Toro, when he transforms into the Wolfman, we do see him engaging in some carnivorous action. He specifically requested that the props be edible for the human pieces he was eating, so that he could really like get in there. Like bone was constructed. I believe they used honeycomb to be some of the blood. They used like different jellies. They used like some licorice type stuff.
So they didn't use real human flesh, is what you're getting at.
No. They did not use real human flesh. But he really did want to have that like the ability to like bite and chew and have that very visceral thing. All right. So final verdict on, does it fly for the vibes? Would you want to be able to transform into some other animal form, whether it's for useful reasons, whether it's for philosophical planet-wide reasons?
Wonder Twin. Activate.
Yes.
Boom! Form of an ice animal.
Form of a jaguar. Yeah. What was I about to say?
Hey, thank you guys for joining us. It's always fun. I hope you had a good time hanging out with us. Where can they find us, my dear friend?
They can find us at doesitflypod.com. And I have to give a shout out to our producers. They do an incredible job, not only of posting background on the movie that we talk about, but a lot of the scientific stuff that Hakeem has referenced, as well as some of the behind the scenes that I've talked about. They'll put links there. So if you want to take a deeper dive, it's a great place to start. You can also find us at Does It Fly Pod on your favorite social platform of choice. And please give us a shout. Again, we've actually posed some questions to you in this episode. So if you've got answers, let us know. And if you have ideas for future episodes, future science in the movies and TV questions you'd like us to take on, let us know.
Let us know. And work on your howl.
See you next time.
See ya.